computer. And all right, so back to what I was saying right before I left. Here we can grab the index and it tells us exactly what we need. We go to print the index and it gives us the index of 1. So now I can find something inside of my list. And I believe the next thing we were about to go over, is what is index doing under the hood? So under the hood, index is actually doing what we're trying. Oh, actually, this is something different, but index is actually iterating through my loop, through my list, and it's checking each individual value to see if any of them match what I pass as an argument. And if it does, then it returns to me the index that it's at. But let's say I pass something that's not inside there, and that works. Well, instead it's going to give me this something. It's not in the list because I try to pass it with index. So it's going to give me a negative, it's not going to return to me a -1. It's just going to give me a complete failure. So maybe before I run this function, the first thing I want to do is check if something is inside my my list. So I can go ahead and print and say, is something in list of names? And that's actually going to go ahead and give me back a Boolean variable, which will be true or false. Because something is not in list of names, gives me false. If I pass tomato, which we know is in the list of names, it gives me back true. Okay, so now we were able to find items. Now let's say that I wanted to check. Someone have a question? Okay, moving forward. Now let's say that, is that me or does everybody else hear that?
I hear it too.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out where this hot mic is coming from. Okay, seems that we're good now. All right, let's continue pushing. So now we went over how to find something inside of a list, but let's go over how to find something inside of a dictionary. So now we have my employee dictionary, and I can't check if something is inside of the values right away. So I can't say print is Alice in my employee, right? Because by saying that, it's going to tell me false. And it's going to tell me false because I'm trying to tell it to check the keys. I assume it is case sensitive when we use the in function. Yes, it is case sensitive. All right, so I'm trying to tell it to find the keys. If I pass a name, well, in that case, it would give me true. But just like we know, we can deconstruct our dictionary, right? Maybe I can say in dot keys. That's going to give me true because I'm trying to check the keys again. But if I switch it back to values, it's going to give me false. Okay, well, what if I try to use items? I believe that is also going to fail, but we'll see. Right, so it also gives me false because and let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So my employee items. So when I run this, my employee.items is actually creating a list of tuples for each individual key value pair. And that's the reason why it still fails. So again, if I want to check if something is inside of a dictionary, I have to specify which one am I checking. Am I checking the keys or am I checking the values? So name in my employee, that's going to come back true because that's one of the keys. If I say dot values and I change name to Alice, that is going to come back true because I'm checking the values. Awesome. So now I'm able to check my values. And now we're going to go into switch cases. All right. And with switch cases, we're going to use the match. So let's try to run this program real quick. Let me ensure that any print statements are commented out. And let's go into input. So the input function is something that you can use to get input from the user through the terminal. So let's say lang is equal to input. And let's say, I don't know, what's your favorite language? And let's turn that into a question mark and make it a new line. Okay, well, when I run this program, we see that it prints out the question, what's your favorite language? And let's say here I put Python. Okay, that ends it. But now let's say I print lang. You see that second statement that printed lang, it actually prints out the value of whatever I passed into the terminal. Okay, and this is useful because this is specifically the function that you'll be using in the def grammar problem. But later on, you can also make more terminal guided programs where you'll need to understand the input function. All right, but let's use match here to have our case. So let's take match in lang and let's do case. All right, and I have to specify the case. So if lang is equal to Python, then I wanted to print mine too. And then let's say it's JavaScript. It's okay, I guess. And then let's do C#. That's good for OP. And then Java. That's just terrible. Okay, so now let's say I run this. What it's going to do is it's going to take my input and then it's going to compare my input to each one of these cases. So if I put in Python, it's going to say mine too, because went into this input, it matched it with Python. So I was able to print the following code block. Now let's say that I do it where I'm asking to do C#. Well, let's run the program again. It's going to ask me what my favorite language is. And pass in C# and it says that's good for OP. Something important is that anything that goes into input will always be interpreted as a string. So if you're doing numbers, even numbers will be interpreted as a string. And then lastly, we have this case underscore. And what I'm doing by saying this case underscore is I'm saying everything else. Few matches fall through. Could you specify a little bit, Eric?
Like, do you need like a break statement?
No, so you don't need a break statement in this one. It's going to check. And if it doesn't match, it just goes to the next one and continues going all the way down. I know in JavaScript, you need a break every time you've closed the case, right? Well, in here, we just use this case with the underscore to be able to account for any other type of input. Well, now if I run it, I put in 5, it just says not a language, or it's supposed to say not a language, but there you go.
What is the match keyword for?
So the match keyword will basically tell it that whatever variable I put trailing match, I'm going to tell it that I'm eventually going to ask it to match a specific thing, whether that be a case or a regex. And it's basically going to return to me a true or false variable. So when it runs in this condition, if I use case, well, I'm telling it to conduct a specific behavior if it's true. Later on, when we start using regex, I can say if it matches, then do this information. all match does is basically tells me if something is true or false when it runs into a separate argument. Does that make sense?
Is
Yeah,
it a strict match or a looser match? Like, does the case need to be perfect?
Yeah, it's actually a strict match unless I'm using regex. So let me pass in Python. So you see how I use Python with a capital and there I have a lowercase. It gives me not language.
So you could use like where you have case Python, you could use a regex to let it be lowercase or uppercase in that case there.
Yes, you can. You could change the cases to where they would be regex. So let's say like one of the assignments that you guys had was the password confirmation, right? Or have we not gotten to that one yet?
It was Google, it was emails and URLs that we did, like valid emails and URLs.
Yes. I think it's during the application process. You guys have to do a password confirmation.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Yeah, so that's where that would come in, right? I could use regex to use that password confirmation for me. And then I could utilize it with match so that I can pass in whatever argument was passed and then run it against my regex. And then I could just return whether that was true or false. Awesome. All right, now we got Lambda functions, and then we got a couple of list methods. And then we got a couple of dictionary methods, and then we go into try and accept. Ooh,
Could you go over the match in a different type of example?
So in this example, we're trying to utilize it for cases. Do you mean match as in a different other than for switch cases?
Yeah, could you go through like a list? Like, does it work for a list or
Yeah.
a dictionary?
Yeah, so let's say that I make this into a function, right? So function, okay, that's not how that works. So function, tell me a language. And let's say that the argument that I pass is lang. And let me comment this out. Then I tab this in. Okay, nice. So now let's say languages. And I make those equal to Python. We know that's not going to work. So then let's do Python. And then the last one, let's do C#. And let's just do Java as well. Okay, so now I can say for LAN in languages, then I want you to run the function, tell me a language, and I'm going to pass LAN in there. So the first one was Python. It didn't match anything, so it gave me back not a language. The second one was regular Python with all lowercase, so it gave me back mine too. Then C#, it gives me back that's good for OP. And then Java, where I say that's just terrible. Is that towards the question you were asking, Roger?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course, no problem. All right. So let's go back to where we were, fighting items on the list, switch cases. Let's move into some Lambda functions. All right, so we can make this function where it's called add1, and it's going to take x, and it's just going to return x plus 1, which is basically the same thing that I have on the left side, right? Well, we can also do a Lambda function. So what this would look like instead is it would look like this. I would say add1, and I would say add1 is equal to Lambda. We're going to take x, and then x plus 2, or 1, sorry. Well, now when I run this function, like print add1, pass it the number 5. I never specified that this is a function, nor did I specify how many arguments it was going to take. But by saying lambda, I'm basically telling it, take this as a function. X will be the parameter that you'll receive. And this is the behavior that I want you to do to X. Right, kind of like arrow functions. So now when I run this, we see that it's 6. Right? Again, this is what tells my Python program that add1 is a function. X is telling Python, this is the argument that you'll be receiving. And this is the behavior that I want you to do to this argument.
Can it take more parameters?
Yeah, so let's see it with more parameters. Let's say X comma Y, and let's say that we multiply that 6. Okay, so now we should get 6 times 6, which should give us 36. All right, and now if I run this, oh, sorry. I put 6 instead of putting Y. There you go. So now if I run this, we get 36. So again, I'm telling it this is a function. You're going to receive a parameter of X and a parameter of Y. And it's separated by a comma. So X is interpreted as 5. 5 plus 1 is 6. And then Y is interpreted as 6. So it multiplies 6 times 6 and gives us 36. When would you use a lambda function instead of DEF? That's entirely up to you. It's mainly just a shorthand way of being able to write a function.
So you can use it like for one-liners, yeah? If it's like more than one line, probably it's better not to use it.
Yeah, I would, if you feel like you can squeeze it into one line and to where it is fully understandable, then do it, right? But if it's not worth it, meaning if there's multiple lines of code that you're trying to squeeze all into one line, just make it the actual function call, construct the body. That way, if something goes wrong within the function, you could always go back and diagnose it so that it's working the way you want it to. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
Are you gonna upload this on Slack after this call?
This will end up all on GitHub. What we're gonna do is there will be either a demos and note repository where we'll put everything on there, or we'll create a branch where you guys can go to and it'll say solution, and then you could click on it and it'll show you the solution file. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So that's our Lambda functions. There's a couple of other shorthand things that we can do. For example, our if statements. Let's say I can print, so print yes, and then I can say if 5 is greater than 3, else no. And when I run this, we see that it says yes. All right, so what it does is the left side is what I want to happen if something is true, and the right side is what I want to happen if the condition in the middle is false. So again, if I could switch this to where it would be false, so now 3 is greater than 5, and when I run this, I get no. So that's just another shorthand method. There's also like a shorthand way that we could iterate through a list to create other lists. If you guys are interested in shorthand, I could definitely demonstrate it. Let's see, where is our dictionaries? Okay, so we have this people dictionaries, and let's say that I wanted to create a list of names from these 3 people. So let's say I just name it names, and I say what I want to hold is x.name for x in people. And now when I print names, we see Alice, Bob, and Carol. So what this is doing is I'm telling it, I want you to grab the name from every element of X for X inside of people. All right, so it's just a shorter way of creating list and making our for loops. Okay, so that's enough of shorthand. Let's go into some list methods. Here we can see that somebody utilized a lambda function inside of a map. So let's do that. We already established this function, right, of adding 1 and multiplying it times y. So let's just do this. Let's create a list of nums, and let's make that equal to 1, 3, 6, and 8. Well, now I can say, instead of doing the entire for loop, I can use the map function. So new list of nums. And I can grab the list of nums. Oh, actually, that's for JavaScript. Here we'll just use the map function. And in the map function, it takes in 2 arguments. One being the function that I want to apply to the list, and the second argument being the list that I want to use. So I'm going to do the add 1 function. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it to, let's see. Instead of utilizing the add 1 function, I'm just going to go ahead and establish a new one. So I'll go ahead and use Lambda. And I'll say X. And what I want to do to X is I want to add 5 to it, right? And then after that, I can pass in the list of numbers. And now when I print the new list of numbers, it's going to show up like this. Now that's not what I want. So I need to cast it into a list. And once I cast it into a list, I get the total values of 6, 8, 11, and 13. Yeah, or you can just unpack it if you'd like to. I would just suggest utilizing the list. To cast it, it's the quickest and easiest way. All right, then we got the filter function, which also utilizes the filter. So let's say we already have our new list, right? And let's just make our new list equal. New list of nums is equal to that. So that we can see it as a list. And we know that it's supposed to be 6, 8, 11, and 13. Well, maybe now I just want the numbers that are even numbers. So now I can say filtered list. And I can say filter. And again, it's going to ask me what function is it that I want to do. So I want to do a lambda function where the item being X, when the item X is divided by modulo, where's my modulo? Where'd you run? There you go. By modulo 2, and it equates to 0. So now I'm asking it to evaluate a true or false. Then I only want those numbers to get returned. And I wanted to do that to the new list of numbers. And again, I can now print list of filtered list. And when I run it, we see that I only have 6 and 8 because the other 2 numbers were not available. So let me print the first list. We see 6, 8, 11, and 13. Well, the only ones divisible by 2 were 6 and 8. All right. So now we went over filter and now reduce. So reduce is going to take in a couple of things. All right, so we see here that we're using something called func tools to be able to run reduce. Seems like this is importing a bit more than necessary. So let's try to run it real quick. So let's import func tools. Typically, you just want your import statements to be at the top of your file, but for the time being, we'll utilize it here so that it's easily accessible. And let's make this into my list. And let's actually just copy this here. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera. Utilizing functools to be able to use the reduce method. And when it utilizes the reduce method, so it takes aggregate and the item. Well, aggregate and item is just saying grab the first and second and add them together and then move on to my list. So the second argument I'm doing is going to be the list that I wanted to apply to. But this is essentially saying grab 1 and 2 and add them together. Then it's going to grab 3 and 3 and add them together. Then it'll be 6 and 4, adding them together. Then 10 and 5, and so on until it gives me a total sum of this list. Does that make sense? Awesome. So then when I run this, we can see that it prints out 55 because that's the total sum of this list. All right, getting into some sort. How are we doing on time? We're still good on time. Okay, so we already have that list of dictionaries. Where are you at? Here you are. Okay, so we have Bob and all that good stuff. Let me try to open this up so that we can see it more clearly. Yes, the function sum does do that as well. So for example, I can just comment all this out. And let's say I could do sum my list. And I can print it. And it still gives me the same answer. But this reduce function comes in handy whenever you're working with not only numbers. There's a couple of different things that you can pass in this parameter. This is just an example that we show to get you guys familiarized with the function. Does that answer your question, Jonathan? Okay, perfect. All right. Of course. Okay, so we got this. Let me clear this up real quick. Too much. All right, so we have our list that has 3 individual workers. Okay, well, now I want to sort it, right? And let's say that I want to sort it by a specific thing. So here we have this age variable. And let's say that I wanted to sort people by a specific variable. So in this case, we can sort by the age, which is going to sort them automatically from lowest to highest. So let's print sorted. And this is going to take in a lambda function. Well, I have to specify the key being a lambda function. Because again, this is a list of dictionaries, right? So it's going to try to sort the list itself, but because the list has dictionaries inside of it, well, then I have to use lambda to then tell it this function is what I wanted you to apply to every single one of these dictionaries when you're sorting. So now I can say K, which would stand for key, and actually let's just say key. Oh, never mind. Let's say K, which would stand for key. And let's grab the age. Okay, so it gives me a problem, expected 1 argument, and got 0. So, oh, there you go. So sorted, comma, and then people list the dictionaries. Oh, I see. So we're using the sort method here, not the sorted. And now when I run it, it gives me none. Why is it giving me none? Let's see, people.sort takes the key.
People sort usually in place sorting. Sorted actually returns, I believe, something.
You say that one more time?
Dot sort, it actually does in place sorting. So if you print people, it can be sorted. If you do like print people, this.
Yeah, I get what you're saying now. Perfect, thank you so much. Yeah, so when we run this, we can see that people itself is now sorted, right? Originally, we had 44, 31, and 65. Well, now we have 31, 44, and 65. So it sorts it in the background, doesn't actually return anything, which is why when I printed it, it said none. But now we also have this sorted function down here, which is the original thing I was trying to do. So let's take a look at that. And let's say sorted people. Let's make that equal to sorted, and it would take people and then take in the key. Okay, so now when I run this, I'm not printing it, so let's print it real quick. And I think I have to cast it back into a list, but I may not. Let's check it out. Okay, perfect. So now it sorts it. It did the same exact thing. It's just a different function. Now I have to pass in the list itself as one of the arguments, followed on by the function. And this sorted also has this argument, which has reverse. So I can also do comma, reverse is true. And by passing that, I should see 65, 44, and 31 in my order of dictionaries. All right. Moving on to zipping, which is creating a dictionary from two lists. Okay, let's do that real quick. Let's grab both of these lists. All right, so when I zip, basically all I want to do is I want to say which ones are going to be keys and which ones are going to be the values. So I typically like to have letters as keys and anything numerical as a value. So let's say I utilize the zipped, and I make that equal to zip. Well, now I'm going to tell it that I wanted to zip between letters and numbers. So now let's say that I print zipped. I want to see what this does. Well, it gives me this zip file, right? Or this zip class or object. So it's not actually telling me much. I can cast it into a list to be able to view it. And now I can see that it's a list of tuples. I'm assuming in the list or on even lengths, it will have an empty slot. That's a good question. Let me show it here. So it doesn't have the empty slot. It just doesn't create it. It stops. It says, okay, well, no, these two lists aren't even. I'm going to match as far as I can. But then after that, I'm just going to stop. Does that answer your question, Roger?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right, so this is great. I'm able to turn it into a list of tuples, but I don't want a list of tuples. Instead, I want to grab that list of tuples and turn it into a dictionary. Oh. And now when I run it, I have my dictionary of A1, B2, and C3. All right, so there goes zipping. And now we have our try and accept block. So let's see. Try. Let's say I have a function that's going to multiply individual numbers, right? So let's say function divide by 5. And it takes in a number of x. Is there any way you can comment out the previous functions to clear up the terminal? Yes, definitely. Thank you for the reminder. Print. There you go. Okay. Let me just make sure that the terminal is actually clear. Okay, perfect. All right, so I have divide by 5, and divide by 5 is actually gonna just return x, and I'm gonna do floor division by 5. Okay, so now let's say that I want to call it. So let's print divide by 5 and pass in 30. Well, now I have the number 6. Okay, perfect. I wonder what happens if I turn it into a string. Okay, well now I get this error saying string is not an integer. Okay, awesome. Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say try, and I want this function to try to run this line of code. I want to accept, and I could actually view the exception if I want to. I could say as e, and I could print e. This as is just saying the e will be an alias for exception, so I don't have to continuously type exception. And then I can say return not a valid entry. So this way, when I run it, I get not a valid entry, and that print e is going to tell me, hey, this is an unsupported operand because I'm trying to do a floor division to a string type in between a string type and an integer type. All right, so those are try and accept blocks here. They did a whole mess here to try to, I guess, depict it in a different way. But this is generally what we want here. All right.
Could you explain the
Say again?
exception as E? What is that doing?
Yeah, so if I comment this out and I run this real quick, we'll see that it gives me this error, right? And it stops my entire program. And then it gives me type error, unsupported operand, etc., right? Well, now if I go back to uncomment my try and accept block, and then I run it, this same error that it gave me on my type error message, well, when I grab the exception, I'm grabbing the exception message and I'm making it reference to as E. So anytime I print E, it's saying, hey, this is an exception, right? And then when I go to print E down here, it gives me unsupported operand, but it didn't kill my program. It just kept going and gave me not a valid entry. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I'm just confused what exception as E means. Like, would it still work if you didn't put exception as E?
So it would.
Is that just printing out the type of error it is?
Yeah, basically. That I should have explained it in that way before trying to sell it.
It's gonna be more clear if you put like dividing 0, like 5 divided by 0. Yeah, return like 5 divided to 0. Yeah.
Oh, can I return 5 divided to 0?
Yeah, if you put that, you can show like string and the 0. It can give like 2 different error messages. Did I say it right? I mean, did you get it? Yeah.
I'm
And
sorry.
if you write,
One more time.
yeah, it's gonna be clear if you put like divide 0 and a string, 2 different errors. That the return, can you change the return to 5 divide to x, 5 divided to x here on the try portion?
On the try portion.
Yeah.
Okay, so just return 5.
5 divided to x.
5 divided by what?
X, yeah. And just do the same thing, exception as E and print E. And, yep. if you do string, it kind of shows operand type like thing. Yeah. If you put 0, it can be divided by 0. If you can you take off the 30? Yeah, put like 0.
Mhm.
It's showing a different one. Division by 0. It's different errors.
Right. Yeah, so it's just gonna grab the whatever error is happening, and it's gonna let us know, hey, this is the error that's happening.
Could you just do except colon and then print and spell out exception? Does it work like that?
Yeah, let's try it out. So exception colon and then
Like you would just do except colon and then spell out exception in the print statement.
yeah, let's try it out. So it gives you an exception class, right? I wonder if I pass an exception, what it would do. Well, it still gives me the exception class. So maybe I could grab the message. Let me see if I can.
It definitely makes a lot more sense why you were doing it the way you were now that I've seen that.
Yeah. I'll have to figure out how to grab it out of the class, but you want to do exception as E and then print E to avoid getting that class. And then I see this question about raising errors. So you can, right? Let's say I do a try and let's say that I pass a good. And let's say if X is equal to 1, then raise exception. Okay, let's try to do it by 1. Clear. Okay, so we see that I tried running it, right? And let's just say here. So I tried running it, it went into the try block, but after going into the try block, it analyzed, is X equal to 1? Well, it is equal to 1. So I told it raise an exception. So it did raise an exception, but I didn't give it a message. So when I went pre-E, it just went out. Raise exception dot. Let me see if I could figure this out. If exception you want to cache, write exception. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me take a look at exception real quick. Exception, base exception. Okay, and the base exception has cause. Context. It could be the context. Let's see.
I guess you can send it like as inside the parentheses, exception parentheses, and that message.
Oh, really?
Yeah, should be.
Yeah, there you go. So you could just pass in the parentheses and give it the message to the exception. Perfect. So that goes raising exceptions. Did that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right, so we got modules, packages, libraries, and frameworks. So let's see what we got here. We got some Python modules. We can get file one. File one is anything, and we can import something. Okay, so let me move this lesson here. It's currently in here. So let me move Python lesson into practice. Okay, and now I should be able to code practice. Okay, so we see this Roman numerals that was from yesterday, and then we have this practice. Okay, and here's our entire Python lesson. All right, so all I did was with some terminal commands, I was able to move this lesson so that I have it inside of this practice folder. All right, and we have a couple of things here, but let's grab this function out of prac and try to bring it in to Python lessons. And let's actually just make this kind of simple. And let's just say it returns num minutes. Okay, well, to be able to import that function from prac.py, I'm going to say from .prac import, and I think it was nums 2 minutes. Is that what it was called? Hours and minutes. Okay, well, I can do, and it already recognizes. Okay, hours and minutes. So now I can say print hours, minutes, and let's say 50 or 59. Well, we know it's just going to give me back 59. So let's do Python lesson. Okay, so it looks like it's going to try to, it gave me an error. And the reason why it gave me the error is because it's saying I tried to do a relative import with no known parent package. So by parent package, it's talking about its parent, which was practice. I wonder if I could take off the dot and then run it. Okay. So it looks like if I take off the dot, it's able, how do you throw an error? I thought I answered your question about throwing an error, Eric, or did I miss it?
No, that was good.
Okay, cool. Went down a bit rabbit hole. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, I figured we just want some clarification. Yeah, Jesse, that's perfect. The double slashes is equal to the math.floor. No, those operands are not. Did you already answer all of this, Bennett? I'm sorry if I'm stepping on your toes. Okay, it looks like Bennett has been pretty active on here. Okay, perfect. So I'm telling this that I want to grab the prac file, and it's only going to grab the Python files. So it's going to go to the prac py file, and I want to import hours underscore minutes. So it went through. Remember, I didn't need to do any type of modules.export or anything like that. I just established a function, and in here, it was able to recognize any function that had been established so that I can import it and utilize it in my program. Now, let's say here, practice 2, and let me. Okay, so here I'm just going to make a new function. It's not going to take in any parameters. And all it's going to do is return hello. Okay, so let's see. So I'm inside of this practice folder, right? And inside of this practice folder, I have prac.js, prac.py, and the Python lesson that I'm currently working at. Now I also have this practice 2 folder. And inside of practice 2, I have a moreprac.py. Okay, well, let's say that I wanted to import that, right? When I can say from oh, they're not living inside of the same directory, so that's not going to work. I apologize. Let me do it in here then. CD into practice, OS, dear. Okay, so I have this moreprac.py, and now let's say I want to do a df hello and return hello. All right, now to import that, well, I can say from practice 2, and it seems to be angry at me, dot more prac.py. Is a common practice to write functions in separate files and then import them into the main code file. Yes, it is common practice because you don't want to, especially once we start building our Django API. This may be a bad example, honestly, but especially once you start building a Django API, you're going to want to keep your functional files, which are called utilities, separate from your actual API calls. And the reason why we do this is to make sure that files don't get way too fat, right? For example, this file is already 100, almost 200 lines of code. That's not necessarily what we want. Why are you throwing there?
When you get a chance, can you show what's written in the prac.py file again?
Yeah, of course. Here's the prac.py file. It just has hours, minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to identify why this error is happening real quick. Okay, so there is no error, it's just VS Code freaking out. But let's say that I had some other file and I was trying to import it here. Well, you should be able to. All right. That's it. Here you go. Okay, so let's say from practice to more prac .py or more prac import hello. And let's just say I print hello. Okay, so it was able to run hello. But it seems like I made a mistake in here. So I'm calling the function hello. Oh, that's what's going on. I didn't call the actual function. Now when I call it, we see hello. All right, so I specify the parent package, which is the directory where it lives in, which is practice 2. And then after that, with dot notation, I told it there is a file in there called more practice. And I want you to grab the function hello and bring it into this file. And then I called print hello at 196 from another file. Does that make sense as far as imports go?
Is that standard for that one? Like to use the dot notation and not the file path like a slash?
Yes. So in Python, we will always use dot notation, whereas in JavaScript, we use the actual path where it slashes. Okay. Awesome. Let's go back here and let's continue moving on. So here it goes about file paths. you're essentially still building out the file path. You're just utilizing dot notation without having to put, hey, this is specifically a JS file or a JSON file, et cetera, et cetera. All right, and now we go into OS. So OS is pretty easy. Well, not easy, but what OS basically does is it grabs your entire path, meaning from your machine, from the beginning of your machine all the way until you're currently at. So let's try to demonstrate a couple of these. And let me actually exit this one and bring in my other VS Code here. And I hope I'm not bouncing around too much. All right, so let's do some OS. Let's import OS. All right, so let's say I wanted to read a file that was something called example.txt. Well, let me create that file first. So touch. Okay, we see this .txt file, and let's say I just wanted to read, I don't know, say key, and let's make that equal to, or let's just say this is where our keys would go. All right, so now that we imported OS, well, now I can use the with and use the open to grab a file. So
What's OS?
So OS basically just builds your path. Let me try to print it out so that we can visualize it. Okay, so abs path. It's going to go ahead and take in a string to your current path. And now when I run it, we see it's telling me I'm inside the user, Francisco, and that I'm inside of the folder practice. Okay, so this is telling me my actual path. It's almost the same thing as if I were to run pwd, still gives me the same exact thing, right? So print my path is the same thing as os.path.abspath. Okay, so now let's say I want to grab this example.txt. Well, I would still want to use abspath, right? And let's say that I want to do it with open. So I want to say with open. And with is a Python function. I'm telling you I'm going to utilize open. So while utilizing open, I want you to open the example.txt. And we'll go more into how to read files later on in the course. So please bear with me if this is a little too fast and not really in depth. We will go over it more. So I'm going to say that I want to call this alias as a file. And then I'm going to say for line in file. And I'm just going to print the line. Okay, and now we see this is where, and let me comment all this stuff out so it doesn't make too much noise. Okay, and now we see this is where our keys go, coming in from example.txt. Okay, so that's great. But I had to specify the path very explicitly. Now I could use abspath and just pass abspath in there. So let's say that example.txt was in here.
What is that R for again?
Stands for read. And then W would stand for write. I think there's a couple of other letters that we could pass in there. All right. So now let's say that it's inside of practice 2. Well, now if I wanted to grab it, I would have to say, go into practice 2. And grab it that way. And now it still works properly because it's opening up the practice 2 directory and grabbing example.txt. And here we see an example where we can use abspath. So let's say we wanted path to be equal to os.path.join. And let's say I want to do example. And let me just print the path real quick here. Okay, so the path says it's going there, but that's not where I want it to go. Instead, I want it to go here. What's the difference between absolute path and relative path? Ooh, that's a good one. I will answer that here shortly. Okay, so now we have our path where I'm telling it to join, and now I'm just going to go ahead and pass path as the argument so that I can ensure it stays the same. All right, so absolute path will always start from the very beginning of your computer, whereas relative path will start from wherever your current directory is located, and it's going to make it relative for your current position in your path. Does that answer your question, Dakota?
Yeah, that answers it.
Okay, perfect. All right, and that is it. That was the slave fest of the 3 hours of Python with probably about 5 gallons of information.
Can you repeat what you just said about the path?
Yeah, so apps path will start from the very beginning of your computer. So like not relative to your current location, but from start to wherever it is that you're trying to find. Whereas relative path will be in reference to your current location on your path.
Thank you.
Of course. Does anyone else have any questions before we call it quits? When would we use absolute path? So the main reason why I've ever used absolute path is when I'm trying to open up a file. And even though I'm trying to open up a file and I know that I'm passing in the correct the correct path into the argument, for whatever reason, my computer isn't able to recognize the file that I'm trying to open. I try that a couple of times, and then if it's not working, then I use absolute path so that I can ensure that it's grabbing it from an exact location where it's located in my disk. Does that answer your question, Jonathan? Okay, perfect. Any other? Go ahead.
Should we have understood everything you just went through?
No, definitely not, because there was a lot of information. I would say you should have understood it, but not retained it. Because if you didn't understand it, then I did a terrible job at explaining it.
Well, just me personally, I don't know about everyone else, but when I did my just all the intro stuff, I did it all in JavaScript. Right. And then the only time I really went over Python was in that Scrimba in the pre-work, that section. So I have a much better handle on JavaScript than I do on Python.
No, same here. Yeah, same for me.
So I feel like this stuff is going to take me a lot longer to grasp with Python just generally. So I'm probably going to spend a lot of time today just re-going over all this to try to get a better grasp of it, essentially.
Okay. No, yeah, that definitely makes sense. And again, we are a boot camp, so we do introduce a very large amount of information at a very fast pace. So I would definitely recommend rewatching the lecture videos and reading through the notes. And I would recommend doing some pre-watching of lecture videos, maybe from the last cohort, so that you could see it. That way it's not the first time you're seeing the information when I'm presenting it to you. But yes, I would say that understanding should be happening when I'm explaining it, but not retention. Were you not able to understand some portions? And if so, what portions of the information did I fail to pass?
No, I don't think you failed on anything. I just think I'm not as familiar with Python generally, so I'm just gonna have to practice some more challenges and re-go over it. I don't think you did anything wrong.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And then we see the FOP videos are posted too, and they are really helpful. Yeah, definitely. I would recommend a lot Guillermo's classes. When I actually came through as a student, Guillermo was already doing administrative stuff, so I got to have him as an instructor as well. All right. If there are no questions, then we are good to go for break. I will stick around and open up the breakout rooms. I'll hop into my breakout room, and if anybody needs anything, please feel free to hop on. As far as this afternoon goes, just ensure you're working on pairs. We'll be passing the pairs through Slack, and we'll be doing pair programming this afternoon. And actually, you guys haven't been able to see pair programming yet. So let's meet back up at 1:15, where myself and Benjamin will do a demonstration of what pair programming looks like. And then after that, you guys will break off into your pairs, go into your rooms, and do some pair programming on your own. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions left?
So just back at 1:15 Central Time?
1:15 Central Time. Yes. All right. Perfect. Have a good one, everybody.